Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Joel Warsh, aka Dr. Joel Gator of the popular parenting Instagram account, is a board-certified pediatrician in LA, California, who specializes in parenting, wellness, and integrative medicine. He is the author of the newly released book, Parenting at Your Child's Pace, the Integrative Pediatrician's Guide to the First 3 Years. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, I am excited for our guest. As you heard from the bio, we have a pediatrician on today. I have so many of you that are moms and dads and have little kids, and so I know this is going to be a very helpful conversation for a lot of you. So thank you, Dr. Warsh, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get started, will you just tell my audience a little bit about yourself and maybe why you chose to become a pediatrician?
I always loved working with kids. I grew up in Canada and used to coach my brother in sports and then started running camps for kids. And so I just always loved working with kids and also loved science. And so that was the natural progression. I decided I wanted to do medicine, but it was always to become a pediatrician. It was important to me to get to kids early and to help prevent illness and work with families so that way we can have healthy kids. And I never really loved working with the adults when I was going through med school. So it was a natural, easy choice to go into pediatrics for me. And as I went through my medical training, I got a little bit frustrated with the regular system and medications for everything and really have seen that medicine has moved away from prevention. And so that's what really led me into integrative medicine and integrative parenting. And so that's what I really try to focus on and discuss with my patients. And so that's what I do now in my practice and online.
Well, okay. So actually that was going to be one of the first things I talked to you about is integrative medicine, because I think maybe more and more people know what that is today, but you talk about integrative parenting, which is interesting, and maybe more don't know exactly what that means. So maybe explain both to us.
Integrative medicine really is the blending of modern Western medicine with alternative and holistic practices. So to me, it really means blending all of the regular stuff that we're doing in modern medicine with speaking about prevention, focusing on root cause, and then all of those other alternative modalities out there. And what I realized as I've been a pediatrician now for about a decade, a lot of the questions we get in the office really are, air quotes, medical. They're really parenting questions about behavior, tantrums, development. Of course, there's a lot of overlap there, but it's really parenting questions. And more, I feel like parents are frustrated with the significant amounts of information out there and really not knowing what to do or how to synthesize it. And so I talk about integrative parenting now in terms of blending the best of all the modalities out there or the opinions out there and trying to figure out what's best for you. I mean, that's literally where the headline or the title for my book comes, Parenting at Your Child's Pace. It's really important to figure out what works for you and your family, integrate those philosophies together and choose the right thing or the best thing for your family. And I think that's very difficult for a lot of parents these days. And so it's really important that we talk about that.
Ooh, I love that approach, because so many times people will tell me as well, like, it's all so overwhelming. I don't know what to do. And I say, learn it all. It's just education. And the more we know, then the more empowered you are to make your own choices and the best choice for you and your kids. And so I try to switch it, like, just learn it as education, and then you get to have more, knowledge, like I said, to make the choices that's best for you. So, okay, I know you talk about chronic disease. We hear about it all the time. Why are these skyrocketing in children, and what are the chronic diseases that are skyrocketing?
Yeah, that's a great question and a super important topic, because we're just not talking about it enough. I mean, first, just to set the stage, if you look at the latest research and data, about 40 to 50% of kids now have a chronic disease. So about half of kids, which is insane and scary, and it should not be the case. It was not that way just a few decades ago. It was maybe 1 to 5%, and now it's 50%. Yes, we're a little better at diagnosing things, and yes, we're a little bit better at identifying, but at the same time, that's not really what's going on. We don't know. I mean, that's the biggest problem, right? We don't really exactly know why, because we're not focused on that. And it's really important that we should be. I mean, there certainly are a lot of theories out there, and I have my opinions on it, but we don't really know. We're not really talking about it. A lot of the discussion is around, oh, it's just our genetics, or, oh, this is just normal. It's just the way that it's supposed to be. And that is not true. We're not meant to be unhealthy. We're not meant to have a chronic disease. And to your question, chronic disease, really anything that's lifelong or long-term. So as opposed to an acute illness like, cold or cough or runny nose, an acute condition could be a mental health concern, autism, ADHD, allergies, asthma, autoimmune conditions. I mean, literally all of these are skyrocketing out of control, and we're not discussing that almost at all. I mean, a few people are, and I'm glad that we are. Some people are starting to talk about it, but for the most part, that's not the discussion that's being had, and it needs to be, because we have to turn that around. You have 2 kids. One is going to have a chronic disease. That's not okay. It should not be that way. Kids are supposed to be healthy, and we need to help them to be the most resilient that they can and give them the best chance to live a long life and to be healthy. And our life expectancy is going down for the first time ever. Our life expectancy is going back down. That we're not doing things in the best way possible. There's a lot that we do well, but certainly there's a lot that we can learn from our past and find a more balanced approach.
Well, I definitely have my opinion on the chronic diseases rising. That's for sure. I think there's a lot of factors in it, but I do believe we're not nourishing our kids' bodies or our bodies the proper way. We're not getting enough fruits and vegetables. Our food system, I mean, we could talk a lot about that, all the ingredients that are added into our food system, things like that. But I also think it's like an overburden of toxins. Mm-hmm. So would you say that some of these, or this overburden of toxins, is playing a role in their health?
That's exactly what I would say, and that's my theory as well. I would hypothesize, and really I think is pretty obvious at this point to most people that are paying attention, that our food is so crappy and our kids are not getting the nutrients that they need. The research shows that 70 to 90% of our kids, 70 to 90% of the calories that our kids are eating are from ultra-processed, crappy, not even real food. More than half of kids are not eating a vegetable or a fruit on any given day. So they're just not getting the nutrients that they need, and we're literally built of what we eat. And so if you're not nourishing your body in an appropriate and healthy way, then you can't really expect it to function optimally. And then you add on to that our American lifestyles or Western lifestyles where we're not moving. So we're not getting exercise. We're not moving things to our body as we should be. And we're surrounded by a ton of chemicals on all the food that we're eating, but also just in our environment in general. And it's a constant assault on our kids. And they're small and they're vulnerable. They're resilient, but they're vulnerable, and just like we are. And I believe that everybody has the ability to detoxify to some degree, and we're very lucky that we can. But we're getting to the point, I think, that most kids and most adults just can't handle the toxic load that we're being exposed to, especially in the setting of being undernourished and eating really crappy food consistently. And so that spills over into a chronic disease, and that might be something different for each person depending on their genetics, but you see it become an autoimmune condition for one person, autism for another kid, mental health concern for another kid. That's what I think is going on, and it's an expression of our bodies crying out because they're on fire, because we're not nourishing them appropriately, and we're just surrounding them with toxins.
So do you think it comes down to needing to nourish the body better, or do you actually believe in like detoxing with children, or is it a combination of both?
I think the main focus should be on nourishing our kids optimally, because a detox protocol, while it might be helpful in the short term, and that might be a reasonable thing to do if you're going to be changing up your lifestyle or doing things differently, it doesn't really do anything for the long term. So you can detox all you want, but if you're still eating the same way, then that might help you for a couple of days or a week or a month or whatever it is, depending on what you do. And then your body's just going to go back to the same place. So I think if you want to make a change, it's not unreasonable to do some detoxification at the beginning to set yourself up for success. But at the end of the day, for me, we're looking at the long-term picture. Then, especially when it comes to chronic disease, there are no quick fixes to that. Medications might be a helpful band-aid. A detoxification might be helpful to get you moving in the right direction. But the answer is to really think about what we're doing and to make sustainable changes at your family level, and then hopefully at the bigger, societal level over time. I mean, that's harder. So I really try to focus on what we can do ourselves for our family, because you're probably not going to change your whole city next week or the whole country next week. I mean, I think it's okay if you want to go lobby and do those kinds of things, but that's difficult. So what can we actually do is make decisions that are different for our family and try to help our kids to be as resilient as possible within the confines of the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. I feel like so many people are looking for some detox. And like you said, there's a time and a place for it. But at the same time, our livers are great detoxers that are going to do its job if we are supporting the liver with its healthy foods, and nourishing the body properly. So I do love that take. Okay, I actually want to talk to you about just some hot topics that are out there on social media. And I think this is where maybe a lot of moms get overwhelmed or dads get overwhelmed. And so I'm just going to go through different topics. So one of them is baby-led weaning. Let's talk about maybe what that is and what your concerns or likes are with this.
Yeah, great question. Even before I get into baby-led weaning, I think even just the question, it's just so important that we have discussions about everything. When we're talking about, hot topics of air quoting here or controversial things, I mean, we all want healthy kids, right? And there should be no topic that's off the table. The only way that we're going to get to better answers and to help families is to have discussions about everything, so that way we can help families make the right choice.
I agree.
And so it's just so frustrating to see where we are right now. It's like, babe, it shouldn't be it's feeding, right? Like, that's not a hot topic. I mean, there's so many, I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of them, but it's like, there's no topic we should not be able to talk about. And I'm really trying to talk about everything now, no matter what. And people can disagree or they can, rebut it if they want to. I think that's what we should do. And that's how we get to a better answer. So I love that you're asking that.
Well,
back to your question.
Yeah. And I do want to say also, it doesn't have to be just like right or wrong. Like, it might be right for one person or wrong for another, or a combination of the things somewhere in the middle might be right for you. So thank you for stating that before we go through some of these topics.
Well, it's usually something in the middle, right?
Right.
That's usually the answer. It's very rarely the extreme that's the answer. And there's almost nothing that's right for everybody. And when we're talking about, let's say, baby-led weaning, right? So baby-led weaning, giving your kid whole foods to kind of chew on when they're first getting food, as opposed to making purees. This is something that's become more popular online. And there is a lot of discussion around oral motor skills, obesity. And at the end of the day, I think there's some decent research around it. So I think it's fine if you want to do it, but it stresses out a lot of parents. I get a lot of parents coming in the office around 6 months asking me, I'm going to start feeds on my child, and I read all this stuff about baby-led weaning. It makes me super nervous. I don't really want to do it, but I'm really scared if I don't do it, that I'm going to be screwing up my kid. And the reality is, if you're going to be so nervous every time you're feeding your child, then that anxiety is going to be bad for you. It's going to be bad for your child. There's definitely a net negative there. And the research is in no way definitive that there's only one right way or it's so much better. It's not going to matter in 20 years anyways. Like, your kid's not getting into college because they baby-led weaned or did purees. You can do both. You could get some soft foods that are kind of like baby-led weaning. There's so many options that you can do. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. There are kids with no food out there. That's what really matters, right? And then sometimes just getting some perspective on these things really, really helps parents to de-stress a little bit, because you're so worried, like you're making this huge choice that you don't want to get wrong. And at the end of the day, you it's good to know about both, because maybe baby-led weaning is the best thing for you, but you take that in. If it makes you super stressed, just don't do it. Do the other thing, and then work baby-led weaning in the next couple of weeks or month or whenever you feel ready. And that again goes back to that, getting the information in, like you said, synthesizing it and figuring out what's best for you and your family. Guidelines, information are helpful, but they don't know you and they don't know your family. And again, if you're super stressed at every feed, how is that good for your child?
Right. Okay. Maybe though, if we have people that are older, like myself, who don't have toddlers or babies at home, but are maybe going to soon be grandmas or grandparents, maybe explain just a little bit what baby-led weaning is.
Yeah, so it basically, if you're starting off foods, what used to be the regular would be either putting some rice cereal into milk or blending up food and making mushy food. So baby-led weaning would be just giving them small pieces of food as opposed to blending it, so they can kind of chew on it. You make in straight lines, that way it's not a huge choking hazard. And give me like little piece of carrot, a little piece of chicken, something like that, as opposed to pureeing. It's just real food, but just not puree, basically.
Okay, perfect. And so I do like your take of don't do things that are going to just completely stress you out. Maybe they need to start with purees for a little bit and then work into, the little bite size. Or maybe you have both. They play with the bite size ones and see if they can do that and puree for a little bit. Okay, great thoughts on that. Let's go to, this topic I just talked to my niece about because she just had a baby, has a newborn. Let's talk about placenta encapsulation. What is that and why are people wanting to do it or not do it? Benefits, concerns?
Placenta encapsulation, it's a newer phenomenon, I would say, in the last decade or so, and it's become a lot more popular because a few celebrities did it and kind of swore by it. It's taking your placenta after you give birth and in general freeze drying it so that way you can put it into capsules and then take it as a pill. So you're consuming your placenta, and the research doesn't actually show that it works. I think that's important to say. There really is very minimal research out there that shows that it's very effective. People definitely swear by it. I've had patients that have used it and feel like it helps. It's theoretically, some people say helps with your mood or postpartum symptoms, but the research doesn't show that, at least as of yet. And so I think if you want to do it, that's fine. I don't think there's a huge downside or negative, but there isn't great research that it works or that somebody should do it. And most of the people that I've spoken to that have done it say they didn't really feel any different on it. So I think that's still up in the air as one of those things you can do if you want to and not if you don't want to. And it comes out of the theory that some animals eat their placenta, but they eat it raw. So I don't know, maybe there's like a study if to do it and eat their placentas raw and see if that actually helps. I'm not sure anyone's volunteering for that study, but that is where this comes from. But that's not really the same thing as freeze drying it and taking it in a pill. So I don't know that research is there, but maybe if we do more research then for specific populations, like those that have a history of mental health issues or history of anemia or other specific conditions, then maybe it could be helpful for those people. I don't know. Anecdotally, again, some people say it really helps, but the research isn't there. So it's really up to the parent and their decision whether they feel like they would like to try it or not. And that's my position on it.
And are people wanting it because they're saying it's so rich in the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, things like that? Is that the main reason?
The theory is that it's rich in nutrients, so therefore it might help you boost those up, as well as it helps to regulate your hormones a little better, so decreasing the potential for mood swings and mood changes and mental health concerns. And that's the theory. I don't think their research shows that at this point, but maybe it will in the long run.
And do you know why they're stating that it helps their hormones?
I think people feel like it does.
But there's no...
I don't know that there's a ton of data out there. I haven't seen it. I'm sure there are some studies in mice and other places where they've looked at, shifts in hormones and things like that, but I'm not sure that rises to a clinical level in humans. And I don't think it's always tough to get research on pregnancy.
It is.
Anything like that, because a lot of people are not volunteering for these things. So it's really a lot of theoretical research or animal models. And when you see the research, a lot of it is subjective. It's questions and answers. So again, it doesn't mean it doesn't work and it doesn't mean it won't help you, but the research isn't there to say that it for sure helps you or you should or need to do this.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. All right. The next topic. And this one I was just talking to someone about recently, and it's potty training. And I'm interested in your thoughts and if you think you even have to potty train.
Potty training is always an interesting one. I just made a joke or saw a joke the other day about potty training and asking, did you ever see like a 20-year-old who's never potty trained and going to college or whatever? And the reality is, for the most part, no, right? We all learn how to potty train at some point. But there are many different theories and books and philosophies out there on the way that you should or must do it. I've seen some books that are very strict of, you have a critical window and you must do this before 18 months or you must do it before 2 years. And I don't think that's true in any way. I think if you want to do it, that's fine. If you're going to a school, if you're sending your kids to a school daycare where they have to be potty trained, then that's probably a good reason to do it on the earlier end. But other than that, there are many, many families, including my own, that have not done it that early. And we did it with our child around 3, and it was super easy. We went on a trip, And we told them when we were away that when we come back, we're not going to have diapers anymore. And the next day we said, we're not doing diapers anymore. And within like 2 hours, it was fine. Like he just did it. And it was really no work. It was no fighting, no difficulty. And to me, I've always wondered why parents are so eager to potty train so early. I mean, yeah, I guess it's a little cheaper, to get rid of the diapers, and sometimes that can be easier. But at the same time, it's not so easy to always have to find a place for them to go pee every 20 minutes and change sheets and all those things. So I was never in any big rush to potty train. But again, I think that it's useful to know the different philosophies out there, to read a couple books or to see what people are saying that are researchers or in that field, and then synthesize that information, see what they're saying, figure out what you agree with or what you think is going to be best for you and your child, and then try that. And you may or may not be right. You may try it at 18 months and be like, wow, this is horrible. My kid's not ready. I'm not ready. That's okay. So then you do it again in a few months. Or, maybe your kid was more ready at 18 months, but you waited till 2.5, but they did it at 2.5. Okay, so what? Like, it doesn't really matter for the most part, I think, for most kids, and we don't need to stress about it so much. There's enough to stress about. So these kinds of things we synthesize, that we do what we feel like is best. That's what parenting is. We don't know all the answers. We figured out as we go. And what's best for one kid might not be best for the next one. Like you might have 2 kids or 3 kids. The first one, potty training was perfect at 18 months and they were ready, and the next one's not. And forcing them to do it at 18 months is going to be the worst thing for them. And maybe they're going to be better at 2.5 or 3. So even in your own family, it's not always the same for the kids.
So if parents come into your office with their kids and ask you questions about potty training, that's basically the response that you give them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually I think for most things, I think it's parental choice. I think it's good to be aware of the differences. And, sometimes there are specific situations where there might be reasons to do one thing or the other. But in general, the answer is it doesn't really matter. Do it when you feel ready or when you feel like your child is ready, and give it a try and see how it goes. Medical issues come in if you are not potty trained when you're a lot older, right? I mean, then, we're running into when they're getting in the teen years or when they're having accidents. I mean, that's when realistically you can start having questions with your doctor about potty training, not when they're 2. I mean, who cares if a 2.5-year-old is potty trained or not? It doesn't matter, not really, I think.
Yeah. Well, I love your trial and error thought, because with my first child, I did feel all that pressure. I was reading books and, I got to do it like this. And I tried like right when he was 2 years old, and it was a nightmare. Like I was like, this is a pain in the rear. I am not going to be around every 10 minutes to put him on the potty to try this. And so then a mom had told me, oh my gosh, I wait till 3 with every kid. And on their 3rd birthday, they just know that one of their gifts is new fun underwear. And she's like, every time it worked. So I tried it. Same thing. At 3, they were just ready. They did the underwear and we never had to potty train. So it was a trial and error for me, and I read the books, but I like that you have that philosophy of do what's best for your kid. Every kid's going to be different, and try it out.
Yeah. And I think just empowering parents to even think that there are different options out there is kind of the key. Like you have to realize as a parent when you're online, on social media, wherever it is, if you're watching some person who has a very specific program, that's what they do. That's what they get paid for. They want you to buy their course. They want you to buy their book. They want you to do it their way. This is what they've studied. And it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but it's just their way. And there are many ways to do most things. And they want to get you to buy something. And that's the world that we live in. That's okay. I mean, if you're a potty training consultant, like your thing is, here's how you're going to do it. I want to give you the exact program and plan. But you have to realize that your kid might be not the right kid for that plan. And if you are aware of some of the other things out there, then you might be like, well, I like this, but that's not going to work for my kid. I'm going to take these kind of pieces from your plan. I'm going to take these kind of pieces from the other plan, bring those together. And yeah, let's do it at 3 for our kid because I think that's going to work better. Great.
Yeah.
Great. And then you're happier. You're not stressed. And, maybe 2 is right for you. I don't know, but that's what we have to figure out as a parent.
Right. Okay, so then my next topic, I almost think you're going to answer the same way, but maybe not. So the topic, and I get followers, listeners all the time that ask me about this, and it's sleep training. Mm-hmm. Because on social media, there are some very well-known sites and practices of like, you should do it this way. It's the best way. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's just sleep training, I think, is a little bit different because seems like there's a lot more anger behind it. and a lot more division than potty training. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people getting mad at everybody else for talking about potty training kids. But when you talk about sleep training, there is a very big divide, because there's, kind of one group of people that are very pro sleep training and they want to do it and it works and they're happy they did it. And then the other group that says, you should never sleep train and you're going to harm your child emotionally and all these things, or that you can't sleep train them. So at least for me, as a doctor and someone who's been in the field for a while, I mean, you definitely can sleep train a child. I think there's no question about it. There's a whole industry of it. And I've worked with many families that, didn't really want to do it for a long time and then decided they really do need to sleep, and their child's old enough now and they're comfortable doing it. And over the weekend, they worked on it, and by the next week, their kid was sleeping through the night or much longer. So it's definitely something that we can do. I mean, we can work on most things with kids. And I think it's very similar to potty training if you kind of step back and think about it. We don't teach our kids to go on the potty, then they'll just be peeing wherever, right? I mean, that's what animals do. So we teach them in our society. We go to the bathroom on a potty. And similarly for sleep training, we're teaching our kids that for us, we sleep through these hours, sleep through the night, we don't get up during the night, we will see you in the morning. I mean, I think that is what we do as a society. And I think that's okay to teach them to be a good sleeper and to stay asleep if you want to, and if you are comfortable doing that. When to do it is a very I say up to you. I think, some people do it at 2 months or 3 months. Other people do it at 6 months. Other people don't ever want to do it. I would say the majority of people are exhausted enough by 9 months to a year that's when they decide to do it. And I've never once had any family who did sleep training say, "Oh man, I'm so upset that you talked to me about sleep training, Dr. Joel. Like, it was horrible." It's always like, "Why didn't we do that 6 months ago? It was super easy. It took 2 days and now we're sleeping better." And in our society, especially these days, most families or many families have 2 working parents, and getting a night sleep is very valuable to them. And yes, sometimes it can be frustrating. Yes, sometimes there can be a little crying. It doesn't have to be super harsh, or you don't have to throw them in a room and say, "I'll see you in the morning," and never do anything. Like, there's a lot of in between and a lot of gentle ways to do sleep teaching or working with kids to help them sleep through the night. And oftentimes there's a huge net positive for the family in terms of rested parents that are more present because they're happier, they're well rested, their child's more well rested, really kind of improved their home life because they're just rested. So I think that there's a net positive there. And sometimes people are worried about crying, but you might have a little more crying for 2 or 3 days, but you have a lot less crying overall if your kid is sleeping through the night. So I am a big fan of doing it gently. There's a lot of methods out there, whatever you want to call gentle, gently, or kind of like Ferber methods or extinction methods, or going in every couple of minutes, or sitting there, whatever it is. But you don't have to throw them in a room and say good night and we'll see you tomorrow. There's a lot in between where you can still be present, still make sure they're okay, but you're still working to not feed them throughout the night. You're working to help them go back to sleep as opposed to picking them up and doing a whole bunch of stuff at night. So I think it's fine if people want to do it. If they don't want to do it, I think that's also fine. I understand that side too, but I have done it. I think it's completely reasonable, and no family that's ever done it in my practice has ever been upset about it. So I still think it's reasonable to do it if and when you want to.
Baby training is different than toddler training. So for baby training, I mean, do you have specifics of like, okay, in the middle of the night, if they're already crying at midnight, let them cry for 5 minutes, 7 minutes? Like, do you give them specific tips like that or no?
We talk about, I usually talk about the different philosophies, but like most topics, there's a lot to go through, and it's not something you're going to be able to dive fully in a visit. Like, you need more time than 5 or 10 minutes. So I think finding a good resource is really the most helpful thing. And ideally it's a discussion. Okay, do you want to do this? Are you comfortable doing some sort of sleep training, whatever that is? Because if you're not comfortable doing it, if you're not going to stick to it, it's not going to work. So you have to be wanting to do it, and you have to be comfortable doing it, and you have to pick a plan that makes sense for you. And then advising them on kind of the different ways that are out there. Like you mentioned, that there's so some of the philosophies like gradual increasing time. So you might leave them for a minute, you might leave them for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, until you get to a point where you're not comfortable leaving them for that long. Or there's other philosophies where you just pick an amount of time, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and you wait that long, and then you go and comfort them. But you don't necessarily feed them or pick them up or move them around too much. You just make sure that you're that you're there, you pat them, you let them know that they're okay. Those are usually where there's a lot of different kinds, but the gentle programs are somewhat similar to that in general. And so I try to advise them, okay, if this is something you want to do, I would go get a program. There's a lot of good ones out there. Most of them are fairly similar. Watch a video, read a book, whatever it is, and then pick the program that you want to do and try that and stick with it for a couple of days. And that usually works. If they're really having trouble, there are sleep trainers out there, so you can actually physically work with someone. But I don't think that most people need that. Usually they can just get a program and do it unless their kid's particularly difficult.
And do you suggest sleep training like from the get-go, right when they're born, or do you wait till they're 3 months old to start this, or 6 months? What are your thoughts?
So I don't usually suggest it unless it comes up in discussion in terms of the parents being very miserable and kind of talking about it. Usually it comes up in discussion about like our kid's a terrible sleeper and we're so tired and miserable and we're ready to do something. And then, we talk about it at that point. I don't recommend it per se, because I think, again, it's something that's a personal choice. And there's a lot of families, especially in my office, where they're very holistic minded, that it's not something they would want to do. So I'll bring it up if they have sleeping concerns. But usually you would not sleep train very, very young. I've not seen any sleep training program talk about doing that in the first couple of months. Usually I would agree that they're just too small,
right,
for any sort of program or anything to be successful, because whatever you do today, they're not going to do tomorrow anyways. So
right.
I've not seen anything talk about before 2 to 3 months, even considering to try it. So I wouldn't do that before that point. But after that point, I've seen it work, but it tends to work better closer to 6 months to a year, or after a year, if parents are going to try it.
I'd be exhausted after a year. I'll just tell you that. I had 6 kids, or I have 6 kids. And yeah, about 3 or 4 months, I was like, we've got to do this because I'm exhausted. So, okay. Well, sleep training, though, with toddlers is different, or is it the same? I mean, I hear about these toddlers that are still getting up in the middle of the night or still crawling into parents' bed. I mean, is that an okay thing? Do we need to practice some sleep training? What are your thoughts?
It is an okay thing if you're okay with it, right? I mean, I think that there's no rules against kids sleeping into bed with you. If some people find that very comforting, it helps them sleep, helps their kids sleep, they're very happy with it. So I think that's fine if you want to. I just think that most families don't want that. They want their kids in their own bed. They want to get their own sleep, but they don't stick to it or don't set boundaries. And then it just kind of happens. And then they're like, yeah, well, it's just easier. I don't want to get in a fight at 2 a.m. So we just let them do it. Sleep training, it's similar, but a little different. I mean, for a baby, they don't necessarily understand everything. So it's more about routine and just kind of being extremely consistent so that they learn to go to sleep at night. For the older kids, as they get older, they might understand a little bit more. So some discussion can be helpful. But at the end of the day, it's still consistency. It's if they do it and you let them do it, and even inconsistently, then they're going to probably do it because they want attention. So if you don't want that to happen, you have to be consistent. You set a boundary, and if they come in, you put them back. If they come in again, you put them back. You just have to keep doing it until they stop. Even if you do that 100% of the time, they will stop. But what happens often is the parents are just so tired at 2 a.m. They're like, whatever, fine. And they let it go. And then it starts with just letting it go. And then it turns into them coming into bed every night. And then they have a 3-year-old that comes into their bed every night. And again, when people ask about that, if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. There's nothing medically harmful about that. But it doesn't work for a lot of parents. It certainly disrupts their sleep. And that isn't ideal if it's not what you want. So teaching them to sleep in their own bed, it's just another skill that we can teach our kids, and we teach them a lot of things. So it's important for parents to have boundaries for that and everything else. And if that's a boundary you want to set, I think it's totally fine to do that. And I think it's completely reasonable.
I love that you use the word consistency, because I believe that is the key thing to parenting all the way through the teenage years, even, when they're 16, 17, 18 years old in the house, because I get asked all the time, like, how'd you get your kids to eat fruits and veggies or things like that? And I'll say consistency. Like every single dinner, they knew there was a fruit and a veggie every single meal, and that we all at least tried it, and yeah, so it works with everything. It's consistency for your rules, your standards in your house, everything. So, I do love that. Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. As the school year kicks off, it's time to get back into our routines and embrace the arrival of fall. To help you get back on track with your healthy habits while enjoying the season, I'm so excited to announce Just Ingredients has new fall products. Get ready for cozy chai nighttime drink, pumpkin spice protein powder, apple cider protein powder, fall scented non-toxic candles, and a delicious pumpkin spice muffin mix. Plus, I'm excited to announce that Dr. Red and I are launching a new book, diving deep into the topic of inflammation, how it impacts chronic disease, and it has anti-inflammatory recipes to help you feel better. It's going to be a feel-good fall for sure. All of these amazing products will be available and marked 20% off from September 4th through September 6th at justingredients.us. Now back to the show. Okay, so co-sleeping, then, same thoughts on that with co-sleeping and same thoughts with babies versus toddlers?
There's a little more to co-sleeping. It's a another very, very interesting topic. Maybe one of the most interesting in pediatrics because it is the most lied about topic at the doctor's office. It's really interesting. You look at the research and the data. Some studies show up to 90% of parents co-sleep when they're asked, certainly over 70% on almost every study I've ever seen. So it's an extremely lied about topic because a lot of parents feel like they're going to get shamed or blamed at their doctor's office because, the pediatrician and the guidelines say you should be in your own bed, you should sleep on your back, nothing in the crib because of sudden infant death syndrome. And so they don't bring it up and don't discuss it. And it really does start off the relationship sometimes in a not the best light because they feel like they have to lie to their doctor. And guidelines are very important, right? I think it is very important for us to know about sudden infant death syndrome. I think it's very important for us to know about what the statistics are and how we can minimize that risk. That for sure is true. And very few things we know almost for sure, but sudden infant death syndrome, we have pretty good research on at this point that if you're in your own space, in your own bed, on your back, that's the lowest risk for sudden infant death syndrome. But what the guidelines fail to discuss is reality. And the reality of the world is that most people still co-sleep anyways. So it's important to discuss that and talk about how to minimize your risk if you are co-sleeping. And I think that's important because there actually is a lot of research around that too. We know that the higher risk is if you are on a soft surface like a couch. So you want to be really careful if you're on a couch, first co-sleeping. And then the second other big topic is about sedatives. So if you're on a medication, that makes you sleepy. If you're drinking alcohol, if you're taking drugs, that's a big risk factor for sudden infant death syndrome. So good to know that if you've been drinking, maybe not the best night to co-sleep. Maybe that's a better time to put them in their own space, just to decrease their risk. So these are good things to know. And again, it goes back to it's important to know the information because you might synthesize that and say, I value having the lowest risk for sudden infant death syndrome, so we're going to do this. But a lot of families value other things too, and they value the bonding, they value the closeness, they feel like they sleep better. Overall net positive for them when sleeping together is they're more rested, and so that's what they choose to do and want to do. And they understand the risk, and they know the risk, and they're choosing to do something different. And I think that's okay. Our job as a doctor is not to tell people what to do, it's to inform people so they can make the best decision for them. Medicine has moved into this weird direction where it's a lot of telling people what to do for everything. Whether it's a medication or this or that or sleep training or co-sleeping, it's like, no. You need to be in your own bed. You need to be in your own space. That's not true. Everybody's different. That's what the research shows is the lowest risk for sudden infant death syndrome, not necessarily the best thing for you or what you're going to choose. And we need to get back to that discussion, information, so that way a parent can feel comfortable to say, okay, well, I really do want to co-sleep, so how can I do that as safe as possible? That's an important conversation to have as opposed to lying because they just don't feel like they can tell their doctor because they're not going to put them in their own space. And then, maybe they could have prevented that sudden infant death syndrome by knowing not to do it when they were drinking or something like that. So I just think it's an interesting topic because it really gets back to this kind of arrogance in medicine that we're seeing these days and the lack of partnership and teaching. And I think we need to get back to that because people just don't trust healthcare anymore, really. We're at the lowest trust levels really ever. And that's because people don't feel like we can have discussions anymore, I think.
Right. And they feel like if they do try to have a discussion, because I know this happened to me at the pediatrician's office. My pediatrician that I loved retired. So I went and asked, I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but I asked my pediatrician about a certain vaccine, and there was no discussion. He was like, you have to have it. This is why, and like wouldn't answer any of my concerns or questions. And so I left and was like, I'm finding someone new. But I understand people's distrust with, you know, the medical system and afraid to discuss with doctors, because I was so like fingered pointed at and like shamed for even wanting to ask if I should do this one or not.
Right. I mean, you want to talk about controversial topics. I mean, there's no more of a controversial topic in medicine or healthcare than vaccines, right? And that's insane. It's insane that a pediatrician can't talk about vaccines. It's insane that a parent can't ask questions without feeling shamed. It's nutso that you would be unable to discuss that with your doctor and have even if you're going to ultimately choose to do it, it's not unreasonable to have questions, to be concerned about something that you're doing, because you should be about everything, and nothing is right for everybody. And yet, when it comes to vaccines, as soon as you mention the word, everyone just starts fighting, going crazy, calls you an anti-this or whatever, you know, bad words they want to use. And it's like, no, we need to talk about this because we're giving something to our kids, and we want to make it as safe as possible. We want our kids to be as healthy as possible, and everybody has the same end goal, right? Which is healthy kids, but we don't all necessarily agree on how to get there. And if you can't talk about it, if you can't talk about vaccines, if you can't talk about medications, if you can't talk about this stuff, then how are we going to get to a better place? Like, conversations need to be had. It doesn't have to be controversial. It's just open and honest, and let's make it better. Let's do it better. Let's have healthier kids. Let's make sure we're doing the best things for our kids. There's nothing controversial about that.
Right. And I actually wish all pediatricians would believe that, because then there is a new, well, I shouldn't say where it's located, a pediatrician's office that I know that no longer will take people if you want to do like an alternative vaccine schedule, and there's basically no questions asked.
But that's most doctors' offices now.
But then
there are very few offices that will allow people to even go. Well, alternative schedules, most offices, I would say the vast majority, make you go on the regular schedule. That's it. They will not take you if you don't go on the regular schedule. Then there's, a minority of offices that will let you go on an alternative schedule, and very few that would let you not do any. I do believe that everybody should be able to make their own choices when it comes to a business. If they don't want to have people with that don't get vaccinated, I guess that's their choice, and if they don't believe in that. But I think it's a problem in medicine that we're so dogmatic in one direction that you wouldn't see people because of a choice, or you wouldn't even be willing to discuss it. I think that's a big problem, and that it really leads to where we are, which is this huge distrust in medicine. I mean, pandemic, I think, pushed that over the edge for people. But there's this huge distrust because we're not willing to have discussions anymore. And so then people throw up their hands and say, well, I don't trust anything, then I'm just going to do nothing. And that might not be the right thing either. So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem. And I think it's most offices at this point that are moving in that direction. And that's not the right thing to do. Again, you shouldn't be telling people what to do. You should be informing them of what you think they should be doing. And then for the most part, if you like your doctor, you're probably going to listen to what they say. But it's not up to us to tell you what to do. It's up to us to give you information so you can make a decision that makes sense for you. And we have patients like Jehovah's Witnesses, right? They don't choose to do blood transfusions. You might choose that as a doctor. You might want to give your child the blood transfusion, but if they choose to not do it, then they choose to not do it, and we're okay with it. But for other things, it seems like we're not. And I think medicine was never built to be telling people what to do. It's about teaching people. I mean, that's literally what the word is, right? Doctor, docere is to teach in Latin. But we're not doing that anymore. So we need to get back to it. And I think that's a really frustrating part of medicine, and why trust in healthcare is really spiraled downwards.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have a couple more topics for you before we wrap up here, but I want to talk about screen time, because that's another, to me, this is a topic of, okay, well, I won't say what my opinion is until I hear yours. What is your opinion on screen time for kids?
There's a couple of different discussions to be had about screen time, kind of the littler kids, 0 to 2, and then the older kids. When you look at the guidelines for the little kids, the American Academy of Pediatrics says 0 screen time. As they get older, it's 1 hour or more. When we're talking about the little kids, I get a lot of parents who are concerned because they've read these guidelines or, read an article about it, and maybe they have 2 or 3 kids and their older ones are watching some TV, and then their little one turns their head and is watching, a cartoon or something like that, and they're worried that it's turning their brain to mush. That's not what I'm worried about. You watching 5 minutes of TV is not the problem. The issue is for the older kids, and as we're getting older, the average amount of screen time is like 7 hours a day now or more. I mean, somewhere in between, whatever it is. That I've seen research that shows it's about 7 hours now. What are we not doing when we're on screens? We're not getting outside. We're not moving. We're not socializing. We're not cooking. I mean, these are the things that we're not doing because we're on screens so much. So that to me is the problem, not the screen in and of itself. Like if you're on a plane ride and you want to give your kid a screen, that's probably better than them having a tantrum on a plane. If you're on a long car ride, I think it's great if you can play some games and do whatever for as long as possible so they're not on a screen. But at the end of the day, I think it's completely fine and reasonable. Or if you need to do something in your house, like go to the bathroom, cook, whatever it is, a few minutes of screen time is not the issue, especially if it's something that's educational. But plopping them in front of the screen for many hours, the amount of hours that our kids that are older are doing at this point, that to me is the issue. And I would put my focus as a parent on minimizing screen time as much as you can and making sure that's educational as much as you can, but not really worrying, oh, my kid's doing homework on the computer. Is that a problem? Oh, they're watching Sesame Street for half an hour. Is that a problem? No, I don't think so. Screens are here. They're not going anywhere. You can move to the mountains and have no screens if you want to. That's probably better. I don't know. But that's not realistic in the real world. So I wouldn't worry about a little bit of screens. I would worry when it starts to creep up and it becomes more. It starts as 10 minutes, then it's 30 minutes, then it's 2 hours, then it's 6 hours, then they're never going outside. That's what I'm worried about. That's what I want to turn around, because that to me is something we actually can affect versus, telling people to never watch a screen. That's not realistic, especially because most adults are on screens anyways, and your kids are seeing that.
Your opinion agrees with my opinion. I'm glad I didn't state it beforehand because I think a lot of parents stress out. I hear parents all the time like, do you allow 30 minutes? Do you allow 45? Do you allow an hour? Do you allow it during the car rides? And they get so stressed and worried about it. And my biggest concern is, like you said, well, if they're on it too long, they're missing out on playing outside and going out and being with friends and riding their bike and things like that. So mine's more like, I don't really care if it's 30, 45 or an hour. Of course, my daughter during the summer, right? She's been on screens, but I'm like, hey, it's a nice day. Let's go jump on the trampoline. Let's go ride bikes. Let's go, find a friend to play with, things like that. And so I like your philosophy of it's what are we not doing if we're stuck on the screens more so than is it 30 minutes versus 45 minutes? And let's not stress about that.
At least in my experience, you can tell when they're on screen too long because they start getting fidgety. So yeah. If even after 20, 30 minutes, if my child's watching something, he'll start getting fidgety, he'll start moving around. Like he's done, but he's just not maybe mentally quite there to like decide to go do something else. So you have to kind of be paying attention to that. But there, just like you said, I get that question all too. And I don't think there's like a magical amount of time, because if you are barely ever watching screens and then you're going on a trip and like, okay, now we're on a plane, and they're going to watch screens for 3 or 4 hours or whatever it is on a really long plane ride, like that's fine. That's that day. Like that's not going to be the problem. It's if you're doing that every day. Right. That's the issue. I don't stress about the amount of time, just as a general concept. Minimize it. Use it when it's reasonable. Use it when you need to. Use it on special occasions. Little spurts here and there. That is not what I'm worried about. There are bigger problems, I think, that we should be worrying about.
Right. I agree. Okay, so I have talked about tantrums before. I actually love the topic of tantrums because coming from someone who's involved in food a lot, I actually think tantrums have a lot to do with food. I don't know your thoughts on this for sure or not, but you do say that one of the biggest concerns for parents are tantrums. And so why do you say this? And why do you think tantrums are happening?
Tantrums are a normal part of development. I mean, being frustrated is a normal part of a toddler's life, and they don't always have the verbal skills to express that. And sometimes they can just be frustrated, and it's an outward expression of their emotions. But I think that parents get really nervous about it. It can happen when you're at a grocery store or other things. So it's something that you feel like you need to do something about, or there's something that's wrong when your child is doing it. But the reality is it's just in general a normal thing. I mean, of course, it can get outside of the normal range, but a general mild tantrum is pretty typical. And so that's why I think it's a big concern for parents, because it could be something that could be very difficult for them to deal with, because there isn't always a lot to do, in that very moment, and they feel like they should be doing more, and there's a lot of different opinions on tantrum versus not. So I think it's a very just interesting discussion and dynamic, and just like, the toddler, terrible twos or whatever you want to call it. Like most toddlers get to that point where they're going to get frustrated at times, and so this is a normal part of life. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about the things that we might be able to do to minimize it from happening, try to avoid it from happening. We can certainly learn their triggers, so that way we can try to catch it before they get too frustrated. And certainly, like you mentioned, food is a big one. I mean, sleep and food are probably the two biggest triggers. If they're really tired, it's much, much more likely. And if they're hungry, then it's much, much more likely. So we could try to be a little more in tune with their needs and cycles, and try to get ahead of it by making sure that they're a little bit more well rested, or making sure they have that snack, when it's snack time. And that tends to really minimize the tantrums. And our first one barely had tantrums. I mean, maybe once or twice, I don't know, if you didn't call it a tantrum, but I would still say that it's very much within the realm of normal for families to have that.
Yeah, I remember constantly saying with tantrums, I would say, let's try to use our words. Let's use words to explain this. But then I'd say that, but then inside of me, I would constantly go, okay, when was the last time they've eaten, and what was the last thing that they've eaten? And if I knew if it was something sugary, 30, 45 minutes ago, an hour ago, I'm like, oh, this is why the tantrum's happening. Or if it'd been a long time of not eating, same thing. But if I knew they had good protein and good sleep and a good nutritious snack or meal, and they were having the tantrum, then I could understand that, oh, this is truly frustration and something they're upset about, more so than, a sugar crash or a hunger issue. And it still lasts with teenagers. Let me tell you, this is just not a toddler thing. It goes all the way till they move out of the house. Because even 18-year-olds, I'm like, wow, okay, are they truly frustrated over something, or are they hangry? You know what I mean?
I think everybody, I think that's just a normal part of life. But we, at least as we get older, can use our words a little better, where they don't have those words. So their brains are just not fully developed yet. Right. And the way of them expressing their frustration, their anger, their, whatever it is, sometimes, it's not always reasonable or logical. I mean, they're just different humans when they're toddlers, and there isn't always something that we can do. Sometimes there is. And I think that's where our job as parents, like you said, is to try to tune in to figure out what we can do to minimize it as much as possible. But at the end of the day, they just might be frustrated about something, and that could be okay. Like they didn't get their toy or whatever. And sometimes just being there is really all that you need to do. Let them be frustrated, be there for them. And then, maybe after they're done, you talk about, like, I know we were frustrated, maybe we could use our words next time, or whatever, very simple explanation for the little kids. But there's not a lot that you're going to get through to them when they're in the middle of a tantrum.
And sometimes they just need a hug, a long hug. Mm-hmm. They don't need the parent snapping back at them or frustrated back at them. Sometimes they just need to be picked up and held.
Definitely.
Okay, you have a new book that has come out. And so tell us about this book.
Yes, it's called Parenting at Your Child's Pace. And it runs through the big questions that parents have in the first few years of life. And I really wanted to write this book for two big reasons. Number one, we talked about a lot of this stuff already, but parents are more stressed than ever. So I wanted to write a book that helped to de-stress parents and run through the big questions that parents have, but also talk about things from an integrative perspective. So that way you can have the different sides to most of these questions, and then help you to make the decision that's right for you. So that's kind of a big topic number one. Big topic number two is health. There really isn't, that I'm aware of, any parenting books that talk about health in the book. And I thought that was a really important piece to have as a parenting book. The old parenting books used to be written by doctors, but really the recent ones have been mostly written by therapists and moms. There are a lot of great books, but it's just a different perspective. And I believe that pregnancy, first few years, is a great time for getting to parents, because that's a lot of times when we're reading books. And I thought that I really want to talk about health from day one, so we can set the stage for our kids, help them to be resilient, as opposed to focusing on talking about these things when they're already sick, coming in the office later. So setting those foundations from day one, I thought are really important. So there's definitely a health aspect to the book as well. And so it's kind of a blend of those two things. And especially for a holistic minded parent, there really is not any books that I'm aware of that are written by an integrative pediatrician that are a parenting book that talk about health, then also talk about all the big parenting questions that they're going to most likely see over those first couple of years. So it's a little bit of a mixture of those. And that's what I think makes it unique, but it has been really fun to do and to get out there. And it's been doing great. I mean, people have been loving it and I'm been really excited about the response to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I read a ton of health books, self-help books, things like that. And it is usually either parenting or a health book. It's not them combined. And so that's actually really fascinating. Okay, so can you get this book on your website, Amazon? Where's the best place?
So yeah, you can get the book anywhere that books are sold, Amazon, or you can go to the book name parenting@yourchildspace.com and you can grab the book from there.
Perfect. Okay, so if you could offer one piece of advice to parents, since we've given so much advice and so many things, and like you said, things can be overwhelming. So if you could leave them with one piece of advice, what would it be?
All right. Well, I'm gonna do one health piece and then one parenting piece. So health piece, I would say read the labels on everything. I think that it's so important that we focus on reading the labels. That, I mean, I guess your podcast people probably already do since that's literally your name. But
we hope.
Yeah, when I talk to parents out there, I think that's like the number one thing that we can do is read the labels for everything. But from a parenting perspective, especially if you're going to be a new parent, I want to remind parents that we can do this, that it's innate within us. And nobody feels prepared to be a parent, but we really can do it. And I want to empower parents to trust that inner gut again, because nobody is going to fix your health or be the advocate for your family like you are going to be. You know them best. And so trust that inner gut. And I think that's going to get us a long way to de-stressing and figuring out what the best things to do for our family are.
I love that. It is so true because you can listen to all the advice in the world out there, all the podcasts and books and shows like we're doing today and learn from them so that you know what your choices are. But when it comes down to it, it is that inner gut, that innate feeling of you know what's best for your kids. I love that. Okay. I know listeners are going to want to learn more from you, connect with you. So where's the best place that they can find you?
The best place would be on Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator.
Perfect. And you may know, but I end my podcast every time with asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
I think the best ingredient in life is love, happiness, and family. Just spending time together and just enjoying that quiet time.
I love that. We all need a little bit more love in this world. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been fun talking to you, and I know listeners are going to enjoy hearing from a pediatrician. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.